My name is Serafina Clark and I'm 28 years old. 4 weeks ago, my parents committed a betrayal so calculated, so cold-blooded, that it shattered the very foundation of what I thought family meant. They sold my grandmother a antique Steinway, the one she had promised would be my inheritance since I was 5 years old, and used every single cent of that $95. Zero to buy my sister Skylar a brand new shimmering white 2025 Mercedes-Benz EQS. They thought Grandma Adeline was too far gone in hospice to ever find out. They thought I was too emotionally fragile to speak up. They were dead wrong. When I finally whispered the truth into Grandma's ear at the hospice facility, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her frail, translucent hand simply gripped mine with a strength I didn't know she still possessed. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, dialed her estate attorney's private line, and said exactly 7 words that would effectively incinerate my parents' entire financial future. But before I tell you what those words were, and what happened at my mother's Diamond Jubilee 60th birthday gala, let me take you back to the Tuesday it all started. The afternoon the world turned gray. The call came at 2:14 p.m. I remember it because I was right in the middle of teaching a Chopin nocturne to one of my students. My phone buzzed on the piano lid, vibrating against the polished mahogany. It was my father, Harold Clark. "Adeline's had another episode," he said. "No, how are you, Serafina?" Just that clipped professional tone he uses when he's managing a crisis at the firm. "She's stable for now, but the doctors are moving her to the hospice wing. Family meeting at the hospital in an hour. Don't be late." My heart didn't just drop, it plummeted into my stomach. I dismissed my student, grabbed my bag, and drove to the hospital so fast my knuckles were white against the steering wheel. I could feel a dull throb behind my eyes, the kind that usually signals a looming migraine. When I arrived at the palliative care unit, the air tasted like industrial bleach and false hope. My parents and Skylar were already there, huddled in a corner of the waiting area. My mother, Beatrice, was clutching her Hermes bag like it was a holy relic, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for someone more important to talk to. Skylar, who is 24 and has never worked a day in her life, was scrolling through her phone, looking profoundly bored. "Finally," Beatrice sighed when she saw me. "The doctors are inside with her. We need to discuss logistics." "Logistics?" I asked. My voice came out thinner than I wanted. "She's still alive, Mom. We should be focusing on her comfort, not logistics." Harold stepped forward, adjusting his tie. "Serafina, be realistic. We have to think about the estate. The house in the Hamptons, the investments, the personal property. It's a lot to manage, and with Adeline in this state, she can't make decisions." I looked at them, really looked at them. They weren't mourning. They were auditing. The next 3 days were a blur of hushed conversations and the rhythmic, terrifying sound of a morphine pump. I spent every night in a hard plastic chair by Grandma's bed, playing classical recordings on my phone to drown out the silence of the room. On the 4th day, I went home to my small apartment to shower and grab a change of clothes. On my way back to the hospital, I decided to stop by Grandma Adeline's house. I told myself I wanted to pick up her favorite silk shawl to bring to her. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The front door was wide open. A large, unmarked white van was parked on the curb. 2 men in gray jumpsuits were carefully wheeling a heavy, padded object down the front ramp. My breath hitched. My lungs suddenly felt like they were collapsing. It was the piano. The 1924 Steinway Model B, the instrument I had practiced on for 20 years. The keys that held the sweat and tears of my entire career as a musician. "Wait, stop!" I screamed, jumping out of my car. I ran toward them, my boots skidding on the gravel. "What are you doing? That's not yours." One of the men looked at a clipboard, completely unfazed. "Pickup order for Clark, scheduled for 10 a.m. destination, Prestige Fine Instruments Gallery." "It's already been processed, miss." "Processed?" I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck. "By who?" "The executors," he said, pointing toward the house. I didn't wait. I burst through the front door, my chest heaving. There, in the middle of the living room, the space where the piano had stood as the heart of the home for a century, stood Harold and Beatrice. They were holding measuring tapes, discussing where to put a new modern seating arrangement. "Where is it?" I choked out. "Where is Grandma's piano going?" Beatrice didn't even look up from her iPad. "Oh, Serafina. Don't be so dramatic. It was just sitting there gathering dust." We had it appraised, and frankly, the market for vintage Steinways is at an all-time high. "You sold it?" The room started to spin. "You sold my piano? Grandma promised that to me. It's in her draft for the updated trust." Harold crossed his arms, his face hardening into that mask of fatherly wisdom that I've grown to loathe. "The updated trust wasn't signed yet, Serafina. Technically, it's still part of the general estate. And your sister, well, she's had a very difficult year. Her old car was a safety hazard. We decided that the funds from the piano would be better served providing Skylar with a reliable vehicle." "A reliable vehicle?" I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. "You sold a priceless family heirloom for a car?" Just then, Skylar walked in through the back door, jingling a pair of keys. She looked at me with a smirk that was pure poison. "It's not just a car, Sari. It's a Mercedes EQS, fully electric, custom interior. It's gorgeous. You should see it. The paint is called Diamond White. Suits me, don't you think?" I looked at my mother. "Mom, please. Tell me this is a joke. Tell me you didn't just let them take it." Beatrice finally looked at me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "The thing is, Serafina, you already have a piano in your apartment. Why do you need two? You're being selfish. We're a family. We share. Now stop making a scene. We have a lot of work to do before your father and I host the foundation dinner tonight." I stood there, counting the seconds, watching them go back to their measuring tapes. I wasn't just a daughter to them. I was a footnote, an inconvenience. I didn't say another word. I walked out of that house, my heart beating like a trapped bird against my ribs. I got into my car and drove straight back to the hospice. My vision was blurry with tears I refused to let fall. I walked into Grandma Adeline's room. She was awake, her eyes clouded but focused. She saw my face and she knew. She's always known. "Sari," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "What did they do?" I sat down, took her hand, which felt so cold, so fragile, and I told her everything. Every single detail. That was when she reached for the phone. The 7 words Grandma Adeline whispered into the receiver were like ice water hitting a hot stove. "Change the trust. Remove every single one." She didn't specify who every single one was. She didn't have to. Arthur Bennett, her attorney for 30 years and a man who treated her more like a sister than a client, understood immediately. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Adeline." I heard his voice crackle through the speaker. "Stay sharp." I sat by her side, my heart drumming against my ribs. I felt sick, not because of the money, but because of the sheer clinical coldness of it all. My parents had spent my entire life teaching me that family is a fortress, but it turns out in the Clark family the fortress was built of glass, and they had just thrown the first stone. While we waited for Arthur, my phone chimed. A notification from the neighborhood portal. My mother Beatrice had posted a photo. It was a picture of the new Mercedes parked in their driveway, draped in a massive red bow. The caption read, "Early graduation gift for our shining star, Skylar. Hard work pays off. Hashtag blessed, hashtag family first, hashtag Mercedes life. Double quotes hard work." Skylar hadn't even finished her associate's degree. I was the one working 60-hour weeks juggling private students and performing at local venues just to keep my head above water while my parents managed the estate. Arthur arrived at 3:45 p.m. He didn't come alone. He brought a notary and a colleague, a specialist in geriatric law. "Serafina," Arthur nodded to me, his face a mask of professional grimness. "Could you step out for a moment? We need to conduct a private competency evaluation." I nodded, my throat tight. I walked into the hallway, leaning against the cold, sterile wall. I could hear the muffled sounds of their voices. They weren't just changing a will. They were performing a surgical strike. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Arthur beckoned me back in. Grandma looked exhausted, her face pale against the white pillows. But her eyes, they were brighter than I'd seen them in months. It's done, Arthur whispered. The revocable living trust has been amended. A codicil has been added to the will. And Serafina, she's made a very specific request regarding the power of attorney. What request? I asked. Grandma reached out and squeezed my hand. Her skin felt like parchment. Harold and Beatrice think they are the executors, she rasped. They think they're in control because I'm in this bed. But they forgot one thing. I own the bed. I own the house. And I own the firm they work for. That was the realism anchor I hadn't even fully realized. My father didn't just work at a prestigious firm. He worked for a boutique wealth management group that Grandma Adeline's late husband had founded. Grandma still held the controlling interest. Serafina, Arthur said, leaning in. Your grandmother has officially revoked your father's power of attorney, POA effective immediately, citing breach of fiduciary duty. You are now the sole executor and the sole trustee. And we've also initiated a clawback provision. A clawback? I blinked. The piano, Arthur smiled, though there was no warmth in it. It was technically an asset of the trust. By selling it without trustee approval and using the funds for a non-beneficiary, your sister, your parents have committed a legal no-no. To put it lightly. Just then, the door swung open. Harold and Beatrice walked in, looking flushed and smelling of expensive gin. They were dressed for their foundation gala, my father in a custom tuxedo, my mother in a silk gown that probably cost more than my car. Arthur? My father froze, his eyes darting between the attorney and the documents on the bed. What are you doing here? This isn't a visiting hour for business. Beatrice stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum. Adeline needs rest, not paperwork. Whatever you're doing, it can wait until after our gala tonight. Actually, Harold, Arthur said, standing up and straightening his blazer. It can't. In fact, you might want to cancel those dinner reservations. We have some logistics to discuss. Logistics? My mother scoffed. We've already handled the logistics. The Steinway is sold, the funds are allocated, and Skylar is settled. We're just here to check on Mom before the event. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through deep water. I looked at my mother, the woman who had watched me cry over that piano and told me I was being selfish. The piano wasn't yours to sell, Mom, I said. My voice was quiet, level, dangerous. Serafina, stay out of this, my father snapped. You don't understand how these things work. We are the executors. We have the authority. Arthur cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it silenced the room. You had the authority, Harold. As of 4:12 p.m., today your power of attorney has been revoked. You are no longer authorized to sign so much as a birthday card on behalf of this estate. The color drained from my father's face. He looked like he'd been slapped. You can't do that. She's not in her right mind. She's on morphine. The two medical doctors and the notary who just left would disagree with you, Arthur replied. And there's one more thing. Since the $95,000 from the piano sale was an unauthorized distribution of trust assets, the trust is calling in the debt. The debt? Beatrice whispered. Yes, you have 48 hours to return the full $95,000 to the trust account. If the funds are not returned, we will be filing a formal report for elder financial abuse with the DA's office. And since you used the money to buy a vehicle, we've already placed a lien on the Mercedes. Skylar, who had been standing in the doorway staring at her reflection in her phone, let out a high-pitched gasp. My car? You're taking my car? It's not your car, Skylar, I said, looking her dead in the eye. It's a piano. And you're sitting on the keys. My father took a step toward me, his face turning a dark, mottled purple. You did this. You went behind our backs and poisoned her mind. After everything we've done for you? Everything you've done? I felt a surge of adrenaline, a hot, sharp spark in my chest. You sold my future to buy Skylar a status symbol. You treated Grandma like she was already a ghost. Honestly, Dad, I didn't have to poison anything. I just told the truth. Get out! Grandma Adeline's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel. All of you. Except Serafina. Mom, please? Beatrice started, her voice trembling. Out! Grandma croaked. They left. They didn't walk. They retreated. I watched them go. The train of my mother's silk gown sweeping the floor of the hospice ward, a place where she clearly didn't belong. But the night was just beginning. And tonight was the Diamond Jubilee Gala. The night they were supposed to be the stars of the show. I mean, the audacity was one thing. But the fallout? That was going to be art. The Diamond Jubilee was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my mother's social career. It was held at the Grand Atrium, a venue that ironically, the Clark Family Trust had provided the endowment for back in the late 90s. Every high society vulture in the city was there. Women in vintage Chanel, men smelling of expensive cigars, and even more expensive secrets. I arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a floor-length emerald silk dress that felt like liquid armor. My heart was a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. No more tremors, no more dry mouth. As I stepped out of my Uber, not a limo, just a simple car, the valet stand was a chaotic mess. And there it was, the Mercedes. Skylar's diamond white trophy was parked right at the entrance, blocking the flow like a gleaming metal middle finger to everyone else. I saw Skylar standing by the car, handing her keys to a valet with the kind of dismissive flick of the wrist she'd spent years perfecting. She looked like a princess. She had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor. "Sari, you actually came," she chirped, her voice hitting that high, artificial register. "I thought you'd be too busy. You know, practicing scales or something." "Did you see the car?" "Dad says it's the only one of its kind in the state." I smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. The kind of smile you give a patient before they go under anesthesia. "It's a beautiful car, Skylar. Truly. I hope you've enjoyed every mile." "What's that supposed to mean?" Her brow furrowed, but then she shrugged. "Whatever. Mom and Dad are inside near the auction stage. They're making a major announcement tonight." I nodded and walked past her. The air inside the ballroom was thick with the scent of lily and desperate ambition. I found my parents near the bar, surrounded by a circle of friends, who were all laughing at my father's jokes. "Ah, Serafina," Harold said, his voice booming a bit too loudly. He looked frazzled. There was a thin sheen of sweat on his upper lip that even the heavy air conditioning couldn't fix. "Glad you could join us. We were just discussing the expansion of the foundation." Beatrice leaned in, her eyes sharp. "Did you speak to Arthur again?" "We tried calling him, but his office said he was unavailable for the rest of the week." "That's absurd." "We pay his retainers." "Actually, Mom," I said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "The trust pays his retainers. And the trust? Well, the trust is under new management." "I thought we established that at the hospital." Her face went rigid. "Don't be vulgar, Serafina." "Not here. Tonight is about family and legacy. We'll settle your little legal misunderstanding on Monday." The audacity. They truly thought they could just Monday this away. At 9:00 p.m., the lights dimmed. My father walked up to the podium. He looked every bit the powerful executive silver hair, tailored suit, the image of stability. "Friends, family, colleagues," he began, gripping the sides of the mahogany stand. "Tonight is not just about celebrating Beatrice's milestone. It's about looking to the future. As many of you know, we've been planning a significant endowment for the arts, a new wing for the conservatory, dedicated in the Clark name." The room erupted in polite applause. I saw the head of the conservatory leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of a multi-million-dollar check. "And so," Harold continued, "it is my great honor to present the first installment of this commitment." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a check. He had it all choreographed. The photo op, the handshake, the legacy. But I wasn't watching him. I was watching my phone. 3, 2, 1. A notification popped up on my screen. An email from the bank's fraud department, CC'd to me as the primary trustee. Alert! Attempted large sum transaction on account ending in 4402. Status: rejected, suspended for audit. My father handed the check to the conservatory director. The flashes of cameras went off. The director looked at the check, then frowned. He leaned in and whispered something to my father. Harold's face went from pale to a terrifying shade of crimson. He pulled his phone out right there on the stage and started tapping furiously. "Is there a problem, Harold?" Beatrice whispered, stepping up to the podium, her voice carrying through the hot mic. "The card, the account," Harold stammered. There must be a system error. The bank is showing a total freeze." The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerators from the kitchen. This was the social equivalent of a public execution. I stood up from my table. Slowly, I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking like a countdown. "It's not a system error, Dad," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in that silent ballroom, it sounded like thunder. Everyone turned. The cameras shifted from Harold's panicked face to mine. "The account is frozen because the funds you were trying to donate don't belong to you," I continued, walking up the steps of the stage. "That money was earmarked for Grandma Adeline's care and the specific bequests she outlined. Like her piano. Serafina, sit down." Beatrice hissed, her hand clawing at my arm. I shook her off. "You sold a piece of our history to buy a luxury car for a sister who has never worked a day in her life. You tried to drain an estate before the owner was even gone. I mean, honestly, did you think no one would notice?" "This is a private matter," Harold shouted, but he looked small. For the first time in my life, he looked terrified. "It was private," I agreed. "Until you made it a public charity event using stolen money." Arthur Bennett is standing at the back of the room with a court-ordered injunction. "And the police?" "Well, they're outside, not for you, actually." "They're there for the Mercedes." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom opened. 2 officers walked in, followed by a man in a high-visibility vest. "Is there a Skylar Clark in the room?" the man asked. "We have a repossession order for a white 2025 Mercedes. The lien was called in 3 hours ago." Skylar let out a scream, a real glass-shattering sob. She ran toward the doors, her designer heels tripping her up. The shining star was crashing, and she was doing it in front of every person who mattered to her. My mother looked at the crowd, the CEOs, the socialites, the people she'd spent 30 years trying to impress. They weren't looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with the predatory hunger of people who had just seen a queen lose her crown. "You've ruined us," Beatrice whispered, her eyes wide and wild. "You've destroyed our reputation. We'll never be able to show our faces again." "No, Mom," I said, leaning in so only she could hear me. "You ruined yourselves." "You just didn't think I had the heart to let the world see it. I'm not fragile anymore. I'm just precise." I turned to the conservatory director, who was still holding the worthless check. "Sir, I apologize for the confusion," I said, my voice clear and professional. "As the sole executor of the Adeline Clark Trust, I will be making a personal donation to the conservatory next week. But it will be in the form of a 1924 Steinway piano, which I am personally recovering from the gallery tomorrow morning." The applause this time wasn't polite, it was deafening. I walked off that stage without looking back. I walked past my father, who was slumped over the podium. I walked past my mother, who was frantically trying to hide her face behind her Hermes bag. I stepped out into the cool night air. The Mercedes was already on the back of a flatbed truck. Skylar was on the curb, screaming at the driver, her diamond-white dream disappearing into the city traffic. My phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. "The clawback is complete. $95,000 returned to the trust." And I just got word. Harold's firm has placed him on administrative leave following the gala scene. "It's over, Sari." I took a deep breath. The air didn't taste like bleach anymore. It tasted like freedom. But I knew there was one final thing I had to do. Because revenge isn't just about taking what's yours. It's about ensuring they can never take it again. Grandma Adeline passed away 3 days after the gala. She died in her sleep, a small, knowing smile on her face. It was as if she had held on to life just long enough to see the scales of justice tip back in my favor. But, for my parents, her death wasn't a time for mourning, it was a deadline. A $95,000 deadline. The funeral was a performance, that's the only word for it. My mother wore a black veil so thick you couldn't see her eyes, which I suspect was more to hide from the judgment of her friends than to hide her tears. My father stood by the casket, looking 10 years older, his hands trembling as he adjusted his boutonniere. Skylar stayed in the back, staring at her phone, likely checking the bus schedules since her diamond-white dream was now sitting in a police impound lot. They didn't speak to me. Not once. But the silence ended 48 hours later in Arthur Bennett's office. "Please sit," Arthur said, gesturing to the heavy leather chairs. The office smelled of old books and expensive cologne, the scent of real power. My father cleared his throat, trying to summon a shred of his old authority. "Arthur, let's be reasonable. We've already returned the funds. The trust is whole again. There's no need to proceed with these aggressive legal maneuvers. We are family, after all." "Family?" I said. I didn't yell. I didn't have to. "You used Grandma's final days to strip her home of its soul." "You didn't just sell a piano, Dad. You sold me out." "You sold her out. It was an investment in your sister's future." Beatrice snapped, her voice cracking. "You are always the talented one, Serafina. You have your music. Skylar." She needed a win. She needed something to make her feel important. "So you bought her importance with $95,000 of stolen money?" I leaned forward. I could feel the heat rising in my neck. "The thing is, Mom, importance isn't something you buy at a dealership. It's something you earn. And right now, you're bankrupt." Arthur shuffled some papers on his desk. The sound was like a guillotine blade being sharpened. "Let's look at the final distribution," Arthur began. According to the amended trust documents signed by Adeline Clark on the day of her final hospital stay, the primary residence, the vacation home in the Hamptons, and all liquid assets are to be placed into a restricted educational and artistic fund. My father's eyes went wide. "Restricted? What does that mean?" "It means," Arthur said, looking over his spectacles, "that the houses are to be sold. Immediately. The proceeds will fund a scholarship for underprivileged musicians at the conservatory. You have 30 days to vacate the primary residence." Beatrice let out a sound like a wounded animal. "Vacate? This is our home. We've lived there for 25 years. "Technically," Arthur corrected. "The trust has owned that home for 25 years. You were guests of your mother's generosity. Generosity that you, shall we say, exhausted." "And what about us?" Skylar chimed in, her voice shrill. "What do we get? I have a tuition payment due next month. I need a car. I can't take the bus. It's disgusting." Arthur turned a page. "You get exactly what your grandmother felt you deserved after seeing your new car. A one-time distribution of $5,000 each, provided you sign a full release of claims and a non-disparagement agreement." $5,000? Harold stood up, his face turning that dangerous shade of purple again. "That's an insult. I'm her son. I managed her firm." "You were the manager, Harold," Arthur said calmly. "But the board of directors, who, I should remind you, answer to the majority shareholder, which is now Serafina, has decided to move in a different direction. Your administrative leave has been converted to a permanent termination. For cause." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched the realization sink in. My father wasn't just losing an inheritance. He was losing his career, his house, and his standing in the world he'd built on his mother's back. "Serafina," my father whispered, looking at me. There was no anger left, only a pathetic, desperate hope. "You can't do this. We're your parents. Where are we supposed to go?" "The thing is, Dad," I started, mirroring the words my mother had said to me only a week before. "You're being selfish. We're a family. We share the consequences of our actions. I'm sure there are some very lovely 2-bedroom apartments in the city. Maybe something closer to a bus line for Skylar." I stood up. I felt lighter than I had in years. The physicality of the moment was overwhelming, the way my lungs finally felt full. The way the tension in my shoulders had simply evaporated. "I'm going to the gallery now," I said, smoothing my skirt. "To bring the piano home. Not to your house. To my house. The one the trust just purchased for me as part of my executor's compensation." I walked to the door, but I stopped and looked back at Beatrice. She was clutching her Hermes bag so tight, her knuckles were white. "By the way, Mom," I said, "that bag? The receipts show it was purchased with trust funds last year without a voucher. Arthur will be sending you an itemized bill for its current market value. I'd suggest selling it. You're going to need the cash for a security deposit. I walked out of the office. I didn't wait for the elevator. I took the stairs. I needed the movement. I needed to feel my feet hitting the ground, solid and real. An hour later, I was at Prestige Fine Instruments. The owner was waiting for me, looking deeply embarrassed. "Miss Clark, I can't tell you how sorry we are," he said, gesturing toward the back of the showroom. "We had no idea the sale was unauthorized." "It doesn't matter now," I said. And then I saw it. It was sitting under a spotlight, its black lacquer shimmering like a dark mirror. The 1924 Steinway. My grandmother's legacy. My soul. I walked over to it. My hands were shaking now, but for a different reason. I sat down on the bench. I felt the familiar weight of the keys under my fingers. I didn't play a masterpiece. I didn't play for an audience. I just played a single, low C. The sound resonated through the entire room, deep, powerful, and true. It was the sound of a foundation that couldn't be broken. It was the sound of a story that was finally being told correctly. I had my piano back. But more than that, I had my life back. But as I looked at my reflection in the polished wood, I realized the revenge wasn't just about the piano or the money. It was about the fact that tomorrow, my parents would wake up in a house that wasn't theirs, realizing that the boring daughter they dismissed was the only thing that had been keeping their world from falling apart. And I was just getting started. It's been 6 months. 6 months since the Diamond Jubilee massacre. 6 months since the sound of a repo truck became the soundtrack to my sister's social demise. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for the panic I used to carry like a second skin. But then, I hear it. The silence of my new apartment. A silence that doesn't feel like a void, it feels like a sanctuary. My new place isn't a mansion. It's a 2-bedroom loft in a converted warehouse, with high ceilings and brick walls that soak up the sound of my music. In the center of the living room, bathed in the afternoon sun, sits the Steinway. Wait, let me backtrack. I didn't just get the piano back. I got my name back. A few weeks ago, I was sitting at my kitchen island granite, by the way, and I paid for it with my own performance fees when a notification popped up on my Instagram. It was a suggested post. It was Skylar. Skylar. She was standing in what looked like a very cramped, very beige kitchen. No custom interior, no diamond white lighting. She was holding a cleaning spray and looking absolutely miserable. The caption read, "Starting over is so hard, but staying humble is a choice. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag grind, hashtag working girl." I mean, the irony. She was working as a junior receptionist at a dental clinic. The shining star was now filing insurance claims and making coffee for people who didn't care about her last name. And my parents, they had to move into a 2-bedroom condo in a suburb they used to mock for being middle class. My father tried to fight the termination from the firm, but when Arthur brought out the records of the unauthorized transfers, well, let's just say the board didn't just fire him. Let's just fire him. Let's just say the board didn't just fire him. They made sure he'd never manage so much as a lemonade stand in the city again. I haven't blocked them. That would be too easy. I want them to see. Last night was the gala for the Adeline Clark Scholarship Fund. The very fund my father tried to use as a shield for his greed. This time, the room was filled with actual musicians, students who didn't have trust funds, people who knew what it meant to bleed for their art. I was the keynote speaker. And the performer. As I walked onto the stage of the conservatory's main hall, I saw them. In the very back row. Harold and Beatrice. They had bought the cheapest tickets available, probably with the last of that $5,000 distribution. My mother was wearing an old dress, one I recognized from 5 seasons ago. She didn't have her Hermes bag. My father looked diminished, gray, like a sketch that had been partially erased. I stood at the microphone looking out at the crowd. I didn't mention the betrayal. I didn't mention the Mercedes or the diamond white lies. My grandmother, Adeline Clark, believed that music was the only thing you couldn't steal from a person, I said, my voice echoing through the hall. She used to say that people will try to take your time, your money, and your peace. But they can never take the way your fingers feel on the keys when you're replaying the truth. I sat down at the piano. The same Steinway. The conservatory had agreed to house it here as part of the endowment, provided I had 24-hour access to it. I played Chopin's Winter Wind. It's a brutal piece. High energy, chaotic, demanding. I poured every ounce of the last 20 years into it. Every time my parents told me I was fragile, every time they chose Skylar's vanity over my dignity, every hour I spent in that hospice chair. When the final note faded, the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then the standing ovation started. As the lights came up, I looked toward the back row. My parents were already leaving. They couldn't handle the sound of my success. It was too loud. It told them exactly what they had lost. After the show, I walked out to the lobby. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Serafina, we're your parents. We're struggling. The condo has a leak and the HOA fees are more than we expected. Surely Adeline would have wanted you to help us. Just $10,000 to get us through the winter? We're family. I stared at the screen. I felt that old familiar pull, the guilt, the designated adult reflex. But then I looked at my hands. The hands that had just moved a room to tears. I typed one word. No, and then for the first time in my life I hit block. I walked out into the city night. The air was crisp, smelling of rain and possibilities. I didn't have a luxury car waiting for me. I didn't have a crowd of fake friends. But as I walked toward the subway, my heels clicking a steady, confident rhythm on the pavement, I realized something. My parents thought they were the architects of my life. They thought they could move the furniture, sell the assets, and leave me in an empty room. But they forgot that I'm a musician. I don't need their walls. I have the music. And I have the truth. And honestly, that's the best revenge there is. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been the boring one, the invisible one, or the one they thought they could break, just remember, a piano only makes music when it's under pressure. Stay strong. Stay loud.